So good day, friends. This is Dr. Bob Hamilton, and you have tuned in today to the Hamilton Review, where kids and culture collide. Thank you for making us part of your day. It means a lot to me because each of you out there listening to this podcast, I know you. I know many of you, and I know what you do every day. You're busy people. You have kids. You have grandkids. You're running around fighting traffic, and hopefully you're getting some time to be in the great outdoors. We're going to talk about the great outdoors today on the show. But anyway, thank you for making us part of your day. If you like what you hear, and I hope you do, I would like you to pass it on to your family, friends, other people who need to hear these great people that I bring on, because on a weekly basis, I find amazing people, read their books, and bring them right before you guys to have a conversation with. And today is a great pleasure to introduce to my listeners Angela Hanscom. She is a pediatric occupational therapist. She is also the founder of a thing. It is that thing is actually a outdoor play curated play experience, which she has entitled Timbernook. We're going to talk about Timbernook a little bit later on the show. She's been featured in the Washington Post articles, and she's actually done a couple of TED Talks as well. So this is someone who's been around the block a couple of times. And Angela, is such a pleasure to welcome you today to the Hamilton Review.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be talking about this very timely topic.
Yes, it is. It really is a timely topic. So, Angela, before we get into your book, which is entitled, by the way, Balanced and Barefoot, the subtitle is How Unrestricted Outdoor Play Makes for Strong, Confident, and Capable Children. This is a great book. Again, the name is Balanced and Barefoot, published by who again, Angela?
New Harbinger.
New Harbinger Press. It is available on Amazon, of course. So, Angela, before we get to your book, before we get to Timbernook, we want to hear a little bit about who you are, your life journey, where you started, the things that were important to you that caused you to be doing what you're doing today. So, Angela, the microphone belongs to you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm a pediatric occupational therapist, and so I'll start with that because it was quite a journey to get to the point of working outside with children in giant mud puddles and in the woods and writing a book with this message. So I worked in all different kind of settings. I've worked in hospitals. I've worked with preemies when they first go home, but most of my experience was working in a sensory clinic. And a doctor will often refer for occupational therapy when there's any sort of like sensory issues, like noises are too loud, or they were having trouble with, processing or getting dirty. They're not wanting to get dirty, that sort of thing, or having trouble with attention in the classroom. But we work on the occupation of a child, which can be play or it can be, in school as an occupation for children.
Right.
So in the sensory clinic, I just was noticing some interesting sensory issues with children that I was really struggling with. So, for instance, I had a boy come in that didn't like wind in his face. And I remember thinking, how do I treat that inside a clinic setting? Because traditionally, again, we're indoors, we're often in hospitals or we're in sensory clinics, engineering a sensory experience, or we're in schools. And so I was thinking, do I get a fan and blow the fan on the child? A lot of kids not wanting, again, to get dirty. And then the number one issue that we were really having to treat is balance. So kids were starting to fall out of chairs in the school setting, starting to run into each other more frequently. And so that really fascinated me. And that's what drew my attention. I guess I started paying attention to some of these issues around me.
Yeah, when you got into your field, let me back up a little bit, okay?
Yeah, sure.
And so I want to start a little bit earlier than when you became an occupational therapist. So where did you tell us who you are, your story, where you grew up, and why did you become an occupational therapist? Maybe we'll and your education, and what were the things that kind of caused your little brain to get excited about this area of expertise?
I actually did not start out wanting to be an occupational therapist. I wanted to be a physical therapist. I had a pretty traditional childhood. I grew up in Vermont where we were playing outdoors until the lights went off. I had a lot of freedom growing up. But I actually worked at a summer camp when I was in college and halfway through college and working with children with all different special needs, and the cognition piece was really interesting to me. So I switched directions and went the route of occupational therapy. And my plan in life was just to be a traditional occupational therapist. I had no plans to be a business owner or to have any attention, or be a manager of anything. So the work that I'm doing now was not my plan.
Yeah. And I'm glad you found what you're doing, because you're a voice of reason. You're a voice of encouragement. You're a voice, a little bit different voice actually out there. I think that maybe you can just for everyone real quickly, the word occupational, that always, people think about occupation, okay, like a job. And for children, you kind of go, occupational, what occupation do they have? Well, it turns out the work of children is play. I think that's a very famous quote from somebody very famous. Do you know that quote is from? Who is it from?
I don't know who said that, but it's true.
It's true. So,
Yeah.
so the work of children is play. And so when you think about occupational therapy, well, really what you're talking about is you're teaching kids how to engage the world, how to play and how to learn how to do things that not necessarily occupation like you got a job, but you need to learn how to eat. You need to learn how to run and play and all these and interact with other people. So you have a really broad spectrum as opposed to PT. Tell us in your mind real quickly the difference between OT and PT.
Yeah. So physical therapy, I always think of it more as in more practical terms, like, strengthening the muscles and being functional gait, functional movement. And occupational therapy is really assisting a population to be able to access their occupation more independently and efficiently. However, like I also feel that the roots of occupational therapy was really using occupation to help people heal
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
And so like the occupation of play is very healing for children as well. And it's very, very therapeutic. And so I know we're going to talk about Timbernook later, but maybe we can circle back on how that is relevant to the field of occupational therapy.
Absolutely. So you just said before we went on that little tangent that your initial goal or your vision for your professional career was just to be a traditional occupational therapist,
Yep.
and then suddenly you found yourself working outside. So tell us that that transition.
Yeah. So what happened was after observing some of these issues, I had my second daughter at the time. So I have three children. I have two teenage daughters, and then I have a 7-year-old son. But when my second daughter was born, I actually wanted to stay home with my children and just raise them and take a break from working. So I did that. I stayed home and I had my oldest daughter started kindergarten. And I remember the teacher meeting with us the day before kindergarten started, and she was a young 5. And the teacher looked at us and said, "This is not kindergarten like you guys remember growing up." She said, my husband's gonna pre-cut everything at nighttime. We won't have time to work on that skill. She said, if your kids can't tie their shoes, please put elastic laces on or Velcro. We don't have time to teach them how to tie their shoes. 5 minutes for snack, but if that gets in the way of curriculum, it will be a working snack. And then finally, she said 15 minutes for recess. But when it snows, so here in New England, we get snow a majority of the school year. She said it will be an indoor recess because we don't have time to change your children into gear. And so this whole theme of no time for developmental skills kept coming up. And again, as an occupational therapist that works on development to help with occupation, that didn't sit right with me. So about a month into the program, she ended up coming home saying, "I hate school." And I always felt like school should be fun and it should be a joyful experience. So I ended up pulling her out and homeschooling for a couple of years and learning a lot about other educational philosophies. I was really fascinated by, how kids in Finland were in the river dissecting fish to learn about ecology. And the other educational model was Reggio Emilia, where the environment is really the third teacher. So I started homeschooling and learning about that. At the same time, I noticed, we live on 12 acres of woodland. and we have 50 acres conservation surrounding that, and that's where Timbernook first started. So we would take a shortcut sometimes to get to our property in the woods through a neighborhood, and there's a lot of children in that neighborhood. And one day it just dawned on me, I'm like, where are the kids? Why are kids not biking to each other's homes? Why are they not playing outside? I thought that was really strange. And so I knew I wanted to do something outdoors with children. And so I thought it was going to be nature classes until I ran my first one. And I had a parent come up to me with her son in hand and ask me, why do the leaves change color? And I was like, oh, I don't know. It has something to do with the pigment in the leaf. I was trying to remember from my science classes
Sure. Yeah.
in high school. But I really reflected on my background. I was like, I'm not a teacher. And I'm not an environmentalist or a naturalist. And really at that time, those were the professionals running nature programs. And I kept thinking, what does an occupational therapist have anything to do with nature programs? And that's when I really started reflecting on that, the occupation of a child is play. And as occupational therapists, we're very good about inspiring indoor play. So we'll bring our swings in our clinics. We'll bring a little box of sand and call that sensory and put it in a clinic. We take a plastic balance beam and put little picky things on it and call that a sensory experience. And, really, the more I've been observing children out in the woods, comparing that to our sensory clinics and our classrooms, the more I realized, that nature was the ultimate sensory experience. And, that you can't replicate what's already created out there. And it's so much richer and more therapeutic. But the other thing was that the occupation of outdoor play is really at risk. And it's a very important occupation that, we have to protect. And so the whole mission of Timbernook over the years has been to restore the occupation of outdoor play and to make it as authentic as possible. And that's why it's so therapeutic, is because it's a real environment versus a fabricated environment.
Yeah, I mean, when you bring things in, they're always kind of fake. They're not when you have that little swing that comes inside. Well, it's not as big as and dynamic as the real thing out there in the park. Yeah. Definitely, if you have, when I was a kid, we had these swings that were like epic swings that were like very huge, and you go like swings. 20 feet off the ground or something, which were those are the really fun ones to swing on, by the way. But when you do that, it's kind of like I think about the difference between, Vegas, Las Vegas, Venice, that experience, as opposed to going to Venice. Or, Las Vegas, Paris, or whatever it is, they have this faux, Parisian kind of thing going on. It's much more fun to go to Paris, and that's the real deal. And I can see how that authentic experience of being outdoors and rather than having a climbing wall, which is, of course, fun per se, but you can actually go out and climb a tree. There we go. There's a climbing pole. So that you basically had that revelation, I guess you would say.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And then, so then I had a friend say, I think you should try summer camps because parents are more likely to drop their children off. And so so I said, I'll do 1 week of summer camp because I didn't know what I was getting into. And usually an occupational therapist will work one-on-one with a child or small group. We're not used to managing a big group of children.
Sure.
So I had no idea how much work it was. Plus, I've never started a business, nor did I have business experience. So I went to the town and asked for a sign, and they said, oh, no, you're starting a business. So that led to a progression of work. But I decided to do 3 weeks of summer camp because my friend that was in marketing said, in order to market yourself, you have to do that. So I said, okay. I went to the University of New Hampshire and got OT students because I thought, what a great experience for these students to see nature for its therapeutic value. And so I had 4 volunteers and essentially ran it with 4 helpers, 3 weeks of camp. By the end of it was successful. I filled the program. But at the end of the 3 weeks, I was like, I'm all done. I'm never doing that again because I was so exhausted. But what happened was something told me to just wait and just see what happens with it. So I did. And those 4 volunteers went back to university, and I had 14 volunteers the next year.
Wow.
And then I had a wildlife ecologist and another educator reach out and say, can we help you? And so one of them said, wouldn't it be great to do stories out in nature? And she said, we could do 3 little pigs for instance. And she said we could, after hearing the story, you could build a little house out of hay, a little house out of bricks, a little house of sticks at the picnic tables. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool to bring real bricks out into the woods and bales of hay and large logs and sticks, have wolf masks and so that they have hours to create their own three little pig homes. And so that really shifted the first year of, I was very much adult direct, like giving them activity and trying to engage them, to being more of a play experience where they dive deep into play schemes. So they don't necessarily bring those homes with them home, but they, they have an experience designed to create change within the child. And after that point, every year I was like, I'll do it one more year. And then I'm all done. But what happened was the third year into it, I released my camps in February, because here in America, you have to do that with the camp cultures, release it way ahead of time. And at 9:00, I released them. By 9:02, I had a wait list for all 4 weeks of summer camp. And I had two parents.
Say that again. So you released the program at what time?
9:00.
Okay.
And by 9:02, in 2 minutes, we had a wait list for all 4 weeks. And I had two parents call in tears saying, hey, my kid got into your program last year, but didn't get in this year. What are you going to do about that? And I was like, I don't know, because again, I had left work. I wasn't planning on working, and I didn't want to run summer camps all summer long. I had my own children to raise.
Sure.
And I also had an occupational therapist and a physical therapist right around that time reach out and say, can we replicate this program? This is unique for our profession. That's when I realized this had nothing to do with me, that this was a gift that I was given and I needed to share. And so at that point, I went and got business mentors, because again, I was over my head, and they helped me to license the program and share the concept of Timbernook. So then at that point, again, my plan, as you're learning, keeps getting blown out of the water, I was going to market in New England, because that would have been easy. But what happened was I wrote an article called Why Kids Fidget and What We Can Do About That. And it went incredibly viral on my blog. And then it got picked up by the Washington Post, and then that exploded. They had they sold world rights to that, and then Times of India, Jerusalem Post picked it up, and that's how I did a TED Talk on Johnson & Johnson's main stage in front of, I think there was 100,000 people watching. And that's how the book Balanced and Barefoot came about, was because of that message that clearly just needed to be talked about, was when we overly restrict children's ability to move and play, it's really profoundly affecting child development in ways we never anticipated. And so that's how the message, and how Timbernook, the concept of Timbernook, went all the way to Australia and to other countries before even going to the next state over Maine, which would have been easier to do. Now we're in Maine, but that's how it all started.
I love that story. That's amazing. That is incredible. So you have been trying to just be a quiet little normal OT, kind of minding your own business out there in New Hampshire, and suddenly you're thrust into the international stage, and you're having to deal with fame. Yes. At least a lot of notoriety. That's amazing. Well, this is I didn't realize that part of your story, Angela. So what a beautiful progression. And so I'll tell you what, we're gonna stop here for a second, because I'm watching the time. We're gonna give it a 2-minute break here. I want to come back. There are a lot of things a lot of questions I have for you, and I want to get a little bit deeper into this, into your curated play experience, outdoor play experience that you have called Timbernook. Cute name. Okay, so friends, you're listening to the Hamilton Review, where kids and culture collide. We're speaking today with author and Timbernook founder, Angela Hanscom. Angela, you're a great interviewee, and we're going to come back in 1 minute.
The Hamilton Review podcast is brought to you by Hamilton Babies, 9 kid-friendly products designed for the little loves in your life. Find them at hamiltonbabies.com or amazon.com. Also consider Dr. Hamilton's recently published book, 7 Secrets of the Newborn, available at Barnes & Noble, your local independent bookstore, and amazon.com.
So friends, welcome back to the Hamilton Review. We're continuing our conversation today with Angela Hanscom, author of Balanced and Barefoot. Angela, you're an occupational therapist, and before I would get into your book and into more detail, I would like you to, we talk about the senses. We talk about the sense of taste and smell and hearing and and vision. But there are two other senses that you bring out in your book that I don't think people really know much about. One is proprioception. The other one is a vestibular sense. Can you, just before we continue on, just for a matter of definition, can you talk a little bit about the senses and in particular those two that are sometimes overlooked by people?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. I'll start with the vestibular sense because that's the one that's really important, and it's actually directly related to what is happening with children. So if you don't mind, I'll just kind of combine the two.
You may.
But yeah, children are what I was noticing is that children are constantly in this upright position, and I've been sitting in more recent research here in America, and they're stating that children are sitting about 9 hours a day in a seat. And so that's a lot of sitting. And when I do speaking engagements, I often ask people, how much outdoor playtime did you get growing up? And I hear answers like 4 to 6 hours a day. I was outside moving around. And then I ask them how, think of a child that you know today and how often are they playing outside? It could be in your family or, someone you work with. And I'm hearing about 45 minutes to an hour and a half is average. And so that's a significant change in the amount of outdoor playtime, digging in the dirt, going upside down. And so it's bound to affect development. And so one big issue that we're seeing is that kids are constantly in this upright position. And what really needs to happen is they need to move in rapid ways. And so they need to spin in circles, they need to go upside down. And because inside the inner ear are little hair cells and there's fluid in there. And when we move in rapid ways, that fluid moves back and forth and stimulates those hair cells. And that develops what we call the vestibular sense. That sense is key to all the other senses. It's called the unifying sense, and it's really the glue for what we call sensory integration, which is the organization of the brain for learning. And so just to break that sense down a little bit, having that plenty of movement opportunities is really important because the first thing that sense does is helps you know where your body is in space. So it helps you to get from point A to point B safely, to get on and off playground equipment effectively, to stay in your seat without falling out. And what I was hearing from a lot of teachers that, again, are that kids are starting to become more and more clumsy, starting to fall out of their chairs in school, being slumped over their desks, that sort of thing. And the way we treat that as therapists is we'll actually put them on swings in a clinic setting, and we position them in all different ways and we spin them. We have an occupational therapist that worked very closely with NASA to create this thing called an astronaut board, where you sit a child on it and you spin them. And because before astronauts go in outer space, they get in this machine that moves them in all different directions. So they have a really good sense of body awareness before they go in that anti-gravity position. So the same is true for therapists. We'll actually put them on swings, or we'll ask them to spin in circles. So sometimes I'll see an adult, a child spinning in circles, and adults say, don't spin, you're going to get dizzy, or get down from that rock because you're going to get hurt. However, if we as adults are keeping them from moving in those different ways, we can actually become the barrier to that neurological development that needs to happen to have really good body awareness and be safer in their environment. Another thing that vestibular sense does is it acts almost like a tripod for all 6 eye muscles to work as a team. So it's like, just stabilizes the eye muscles. So a child could read the Snellen eye chart, the charts with the letters on it just fine in the nurse's office.
Sure.
But it doesn't mean they have perfect vision. It just means they have good visual acuity. But sometimes the muscles don't work good as a team.
Right. The tracking is
the tracking muscles, and that's really important for reading and for writing. And so, behavioral optometrists usually work very closely with occupational therapists, and they're very big advocates for movement. I've been on a couple podcasts with them about, how movement actually helps visual skills for tracking, for reading and writing. And they have trampolines in their clinics and swings as well. The other thing that vestibular sense does, and again, getting plenty of movement opportunities, is it helps turn the brain on, the activating system on, the reticular activating system on in the brain, basically, to tune in. And so that's why sometimes kids fidget, they're moving their body back and forth, is because they're trying to ignite that vestibular sense to tune in and pay attention. And sometimes teachers say, sit still, pay attention, but clearly kids need to move not just in that moment, but they really need to be moving throughout the day so they can gain the skill of attention in the classroom.
Yeah. That's
And then,
interesting. The
oh, sorry.
idea of the fidgeting to actually allow them
Yeah,
to focus more. So is exactly antithetical to what people are thinking, that they're fidgeting because they're bored or whatever. They're
yeah.
doing that to focus. It kind of, in one way, kind of a funny thing. Reminds me of this phenomenon of davening. Do you know what that is? When you go to the to Jerusalem and you go to what is referred to as the kotel, and you see the Orthodox Jewish men daven. They rock back and forth as they pray in front of
Yeah.
the wall there, the kotel, the Western Wall. And you kind of wonder, and I think that might be a mechanism for them to actually focus and concentrate more. Interesting, because you think that has
Oh,
it.
that's so interesting.
Yeah. I mean, the way you were talking, it kind of reminded me of some of the visual things that I have seen on my travels.
That's
I have
really,
a quick question for you. This is just a freebie. I have a couple, obviously, motion sickness, seasickness, and car sickness.
Mhm.
Do you think that getting kids outdoor moving, spinning in swings, is that a mechanism to maybe cure that? Because I have some kids who are who literally travel from their home down to, we have mountains here in Southern California, so they come off the hill and they go to preschool or whatever. The kids get sick every time they come down the hill. Do you think that would be
Yeah.
a therapeutic mechanism to help them?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny you say that because even for adults, like as you know, adults, sometimes we could tolerate rides growing up that we can't tolerate anymore, like the spinny rides or the roller coasters. And that's because we're not moving as much. And so you'll hear occupational therapists advocate for adults to even move in all different directions to prevent, falls and stuff. But the problem is the fact that because children are not moving enough, like and falling out of their seats it's kind of like a red flag, that they're at a young age already or feeling nauseous walking down a hill. That's kind of a red flag.
Yeah, interesting. Okay,
Yeah.
well, okay, thank you. That's some clarification. I want to get deeper into your book, Balanced and Barefoot. Your chapter 3 is entitled From Restricted Movement to Active Free Play.
Mhm.
So can you open up that chapter for us and talk a little bit about what do you mean by that, and what are your recommendations?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, what I was just talking about was one of the big issues is like because they're being overly restricted, we're seeing all these sorts of issues. The last one I was going to mention was just emotional regulation is another issue that when you overly restrict children, they need to have plenty of movement in order to regulate emotions. So they get really frustrated and naturally bringing that back down again, but also arousal level. So like when we say kids are off the wall or really hyper, we want them to move enough so they can naturally bring that back down again. And so those are the tools. Having plenty of movement and active play helps with regulation of emotions and activity level. It helps with attention in the classroom and all those sorts of things that we're talking about. The other sense that's really being affected because they're not getting enough active play time is the proprioceptive sense, and that's the senses in the joints and muscles. So that's your push-pull activities, and it's, we call it heavy work as occupational therapists. We want them to get a lot of, good old-fashioned, picking up let's say, a stick to build a fort. That gives you nice resistance to the joints and muscles. Even climbing trees really gave you nice senses to the joints and muscles, and that helps you to know where your limbs are in relation to each other. But it also helps children to know how much force to use when playing games like tag, to pick up a baby chick without squeezing it too hard. Maybe they're writing with a pencil and they keep breaking the lead every time. A lot of kids are on devices now and they're not getting enough heavy work. So they're pushing buttons, but they're not getting this, they're not mowing the lawn for hours. They're not,
Yeah.
helping with yard work. And so they're not developing these senses properly. And so what's happening is, they're starting to ban tag at schools because kids are hitting with so much force. And they're saying kids are getting, quote, more aggressive. However, instead of taking tag away, We should really understand, well, why is this happening in the first place? Why are kids getting more aggressive? Why are they having trouble fidgeting in the classroom? And it's because a lot of it, I feel like, is the environment has changed, where they're sitting for hours, they're not digging in the dirt for hours, they're not going upside down or rolling down the hills. And so it's really impacting development.
You're so right about that. I mean, there's so much of our, that carefree life that certainly I remember as a kid is not happening, and it is one of these things. This is one of the goals of this podcast is really to get kids outdoors. Your next chapter is the therapeutic value of outdoor play. Now, when you talk about outdoor play, you're talking about like raw, in the woods. I think about outdoor play as being out in the front yard or at a park, which is, talk about curated. These parks they have lawns are mowed and they're clean and they're nice and the flowers are in shape. But you're talking about getting kids out into the country. Tell us why that is so important for the development of children.
Yeah, so it's really therapeutic when children are in nature. For instance, one huge benefit to just being outside is bird sounds. And, we have this special thing called therapeutic listening. A lot of occupational therapists are trained in it, and there's special headphones and music. And one day I was looking at the tapes, and the one that helps with spatial awareness, it was all bird sounds because they use a lot of Mozart and different types of classical music. And so I called up one of the founders, or like a friend of the founder, and I said, so tell me, if children were listening to bird sounds, not necessarily bird sounds on your CD, would that affect spatial awareness? And she said, absolutely. She said, first of all, they recorded the music in Australia, where there's a huge range of bird sounds, and then enhance that music. And then she said, if you think about it, if you step outdoors and you hear a bird tweeting in one direction, a bird tweeting behind you, and then like another bird in the distance, she said, you're orienting yourself to the sounds around you. She said that orientation is the basis for spatial awareness. So even just stepping outdoors and hearing bird sounds will help with orientation. Another thing is like being barefoot. Like when you walk barefoot, you're getting pressure in all different parts of your foot. You're strengthening all the little muscles in the feet and the ankles as they navigate their environment. Because you're getting deep pressure as you walk. That deep pressure often overrides that light touch sense that can feel aversive for many children. And so it helps to override it and integrate that light touch sense on the feet. The same is true with crawling babies, right? So if, we get so many kids that don't want to get dirty nowadays, but, if you put them out early as babies and they're crawling, they might feel that light touch sense, but because they're getting that deep pressure, that helps to override that aversive feeling and help integrate that light touch sense. And so, we can try the sensory bins where, you stick they stick the hands in, but that's just igniting that light touch sense. You really need to get deep pressure where they're digging at the beach, let's say.
Yeah.
So they're getting that light touch, but digging and getting that deep pressure to really create change to the senses at the same time.
That's good stuff. So you take them outside, you take them into the woods, and you let them go. And one of your sub theses in this book, I think, is just the idea of kids. One of the things you mentioned early on is that you had interviewed a lot of teachers, and the teachers were noticing that you said, what is one of the big differences between kids today? These are, teachers who've been around for a while, and say 20 years ago, and they said a lack of imagination or imaginative play. Tell us a little bit about how that integrates into what you're trying to do as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a huge issue. And so the teachers were reporting that they were doing much more like playing on and off the play structure nowadays, or playing a structure game like tag, whereas years past they would, dive deep into imaginative play. So at our work with Timbernook, we purposely stage our environment to inspire play, because unfortunately a lot of kids just don't have practice with thinking outside the box. For instance, I will do a talk and I'll hear a parent will come up to me and say, I know that this is important that my kid's outside, but when I send them outside, they come back in 2 seconds later and say, all I see is sticks and rocks. And it comes down to being okay with being bored and experimenting with those items in different ways. So let's say you take that same child and go, okay, go back outside, and they sit down and they pick up a stick, and they have no ideas on how to use that stick playfully. But then they start digging in the dirt with it, and they realize, okay, I have what we call it affordances, visual affordances. And they realize, okay, I have one affordance. This can be a digging tool.
Yeah.
And then maybe they practice writing with it, and they realize, now I have two ideas on how to play with this. I can write with it, I can dig with it. Then they see another child picking up a stick to build a fort, and they realize, now I have three ideas on how to play with this stick. And so the more exposure they get to using that material in different ways, the more creative ideas they'll get. And another big trick is having other children playing near them. And those children will also give them new ideas on how to play. And so the way our program runs is it's mixed ages. It's true neighborhood play. If I was 5, I wouldn't be like, are you 5? I can't play with you. Growing up, you played with whoever was out there. And so at Timbernook, we have ages, a big span of ages, and materials that we call loose parts. So they have many affordances, like big logs could be used for many play ideas. Tires, I could probably think of 50 ways to play with a tire. You might come up with 50 different ways, and I'm sure we're going to inspire each other. There'll be some common ground, but I'm sure we'll inspire each other. And so the environment's pre-staged to inspire play and give children practice.
I would roll my tire and collide with your tires. What we would do, we would like.
Yeah.
No, I used to play with tires when I was a kid. Crazy. It sounds kind of crazy, but that was one thing we did. So you have invented, or you have founded, this thing called Timbernook, and I want to save a little bit of time in this program for you to elaborate on that. So this began about 10, 13 years ago, you say, and now it's now an international phenomenon. So tell us how that happened.
Yeah. So the message got out there about Timbernook and spread pretty quickly. We started training with individuals or organizations that wanted to use the program. So it's a licensed program. So we have, nonprofit organizations that will use Timbernook as a program. We have independent therapists that will use Timbernook as one of their offerings. But in 2017, we had schools knocking on our door. And again, I was like, I don't have time for schools. We're not going there. That's a beast. But that door needed to open. And so we started certifying schools to bring Timbernook into the school week. And so now we're working with private schools and public schools to really allow children to just play for 2 hours. They have a 2-hour time block where they get to dive deep into different play schemes. Another example might be they have the opportunity to create a giant ball run through the woods. And so they have gutters and different tubing and duct tape and pulleys. And so you see your leaders come forward, and engineering, and you're working on fine motor, gross motor, but there's communication too between other children. In-person experience with other children is really important too, to develop relationships, to be mentally flexible with other people's ideas, all these like life skills that we're kind of not allowing children to practice anymore. Conflict resolution with other children, it's all best done through play.
So true. And that was something that kind of happened organically and naturally in our neighborhoods. We have to now create our neighborhoods. So really, Timbernook is really the creation of something that I recognize as a kid. I recognize all that you're saying, the things, the way we played, the way we kind of hung out. And you're right, everyone was, one of the interesting things I noticed, certainly in LA, is that the front yards are not utilized. When I was a kid, everyone was out in their front yard. Now backyards are used. I can hear the kids in the backyard, but you oftentimes go walk through neighborhoods or drive through neighborhoods and see virtually no children in the front yard, which is a different thing than I remember as a kid, certainly. So I'm watching our time. We're kind of running out of time. Angela, how do people? First of all, let me just say this. I want to give you a moment or two to make some recommendations, and give also maybe a testimonial or two about people who. Let's try testimonials first. So tell us, You've had lots of kids in your programs over the last decade. Tell us a little bit about the result of these kind of different ideas of getting these kids outside into a different environment. What are the parents saying? All these parents who were calling you before begging to get into your program, are they? Tell me what they had to say.
Sure. So I can give you two stories, if you'd like, of children that have changed because of Timbernook.
Love to hear them. Yes.
Okay. So one is just a simple example. A little boy, we were going to go to the giant mud puddles that day, and he had plastic welly boots on, and he's like, I know we're going to the mud puddles. I am not going in them. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. So we went down to the mud puddles, and kids were catching frogs, and he got so visibly excited. And so he went right in, and the water got in his plastic welly boots, and his socks got all gross. So he came back out and he said, "Can I please take this off? This is disgusting." So I said, "Sure." So he took it off, went back in and caught frogs. We took pictures and videos and showed the mom. She said, "Do you know he had been working 2 years in a clinic setting, unsuccessful to go barefoot?" And also, just because you go barefoot in a plastic balance beam doesn't necessarily generalize into a real environment. And so he ended up going barefoot camping and barefoot in other real environments because, again, this happened this was meaningful. It was meaningful play that drew him in, but also there was no pressure. Everything's a choice at Timbernook. True play has to be a choice.
Sure.
And often kids with sensory issues have anxiety tied to that. So when it's not a choice, it increases anxiety. So because that was gone, he was able to overcome that fear. So that's one example. And then another example is a little boy that had motor tics, and probably related to anxiety. And around the time of pandemic, they were increasing. And so he started Timbernook, and the mom said that very shortly after Timbernook started, his motor tics went completely away. She couldn't really explain it. I don't know if I can explain it. But about a couple months into it, he was invited back to the school grounds when, they were introducing kids back to that environment, and there was more rules, right? More rules and restrictions around that time with masks and distancing.
Sure.
And, at Timbernook, we didn't really have to worry about a lot of that because they were outside completely. But when he went back to that environment, familiar children, familiar school, his motor tics came back. And then she said it was very fascinating because when he went back to Timbernook, they went away again. So that was really interesting.
Seems like a little correlation there in my mind.
Yeah. That's a little
So
bit.
your recommendations to people who are listening today, what would you tell these young parents with kids and grandparents? What would you recommend they do with their kids?
Yeah. So I guess the most important thing is to make sure that you allow for just time to play outside. I think that we get into a habit of overscheduling our children really quickly and not allowing enough time to play outside, and to remember that that's a really important occupation and that most people fondly remember growing up, but to provide that also for your children, that's the greatest gift you can give your kids. And sometimes it takes effort, of someone going outside with the children just for safety reasons in the beginning, or making sure that there's someone, that you connect with your neighbors to make sure someone's kind of watching out for the children. But that would be the most important recommendation. The second one is if your remember boredom's okay. But they might need a little bit of help. So if you provide materials that might inspire play, such as, fort building materials outside, old curtains that you don't care about, and planks and, milk crates, but just materials that they can build forts with is a really great inspiration for children. Also like, old kitchenware, on the beach, or, providing novel materials in different environments can really inspire different kinds of play as well.
Great ideas. They're wonderful ideas. Okay, well, listen, Angela, we are finishing up here. Friends, we have been listening to Angela Hanscom. She's an author. She wrote a beautiful book called Balanced and Barefoot. The subtitle is How Unrestricted Outdoor Play Makes for Strong, Confident, and Capable Children. This is a book you want to pick up. Great book. And Angela, I applaud you for your efforts in putting this all together. And I really applaud you for founding Timbernook. I really wish you great success. How do people we're hearing this program, get involved in Timbernook. I know you've kind of gone national. Do they just go on timbernook.com, or how do they find you?
Yeah, timbernook.com is the best way to find us. And you can also look at locations too, to be able to find Timbernook in your location. The other thing is Facebook. We're pretty active on Facebook if you want to start seeing the connections between outdoor play and development.
Beautiful. Okay. So friends, we'll leave it at that. Angela, thanks for being on the Hamilton Review today.
Thank you for having me.
And friends out there listening, thank you for making us part of your day. Until next time, be safe, be well. Look forward to seeing you then. Bye-bye.
You have been listening to the Hamilton Review, where kids and culture collide. Thank you for allowing us to be a part of your day. Tune in again next week on Apple Podcast. Rate and comment and tell a friend.